A big change in the weather is coming over the next several days. That's going to bring storms, some much colder air behind this record heat, and eventually lead to a longer term pattern change with a lot more rain in the forecast. Right now we have this big ridge of high pressure that's been baking the southwest to south, leading to record to even historic heat over the past 2 weeks. We've had places in the 80s, 90s, and even triple digits. That is all changing though over the next few days. We have an area of low pressure that's bringing in a cold front. Colder air will be spilling south. As it does so, we also have some severe storm concerns over portions of the Midwest as that warm air clashes with the cold air. From that big temperature drop to severe storms, we got a lot to talk about. Today is Thursday, March 26th, so let's dive in. Starting off with our severe weather risk, this is really the most concerning part of the forecast as we have that cold front, that much colder air filtering into the south. Storms will form and some possibly strong to severe storms. The severe weather risk is focused over portions of the Midwest, including southern suburbs of Chicago, much of central Illinois, Indiana, into Ohio, especially though in the yellow and orange shade. The orange shade, that's a 3 out of 5 enhanced risk of severe weather. That's where the most significant, potentially the most impactful storms are possible. But even in the yellow shade, we need to watch out. So Detroit, Cincinnati, Lafayette, Indiana, Jacksonville, Illinois, Bloomington, up to Cleveland, watch out for some strong to severe storms on Thursday afternoon and evening. Narrowing down on the tornado risk, it is highest across this brown shade from central Illinois to Indiana and Ohio. So watch out where scattered tornadoes are possible. The black hatchings also mean a few stronger tornadoes are possible, and the setup is supportive where we can't rule out a few potentially EF2 strength tornadoes. So make sure we have a way to get warnings with this in case a tornado comes over you, and have a clear plan in place to shelter inside, move into your safe place in the event that a few of these tornado warnings are issued. I wouldn't be surprised if we get a slight upgrade somewhere in this corridor to a 10% risk for some slightly higher coverage of tornadoes possible. Greatest wind concern will be across this red area. That's where the most widespread wind damage is possible, but anyone in the yellow and even brown, we need to watch out. This does include Chicago Metro. The hail threat is also particularly concerning, not just for the coverage, but for the size of the hail. Large to even very large hail is possible, 1 to 2 inches, with potentially 2+ inches. That's baseball size hail possible in some isolated spots. So the hail threat really stands out just because of the size of some of the hail possible. Really targeting anywhere in this black hatching, that's where the biggest hail is possible. And then in this red shade, that's where we need to be the most weather aware for the greatest coverage of hail potential. So one thing that's supportive for our severe weather setup is the energy in place. This is the CAPE, the convective available potential energy, and we have a decent buildup of energy right along and ahead of that cold front. Some of these values are from 1 to 2,000 joules per kilogram, so that's more than enough energy to get some storms firing, and a few of these stronger storms, especially focused across this region in the upper Midwest. Notice as the front continues south, the CAPE just fades away, and that's why the severe weather threat really diminishes further south. Taking a look at the significant tornado parameter, this is something that helps us determine how strong tornadoes could be and how impactful they are, and we do have some of these higher values. That's why I was mentioning there is a slight chance for a few EF2 plus tornadoes possible with some of the stronger cells. So that threat is really maximized across that same corridor that we've been tracking, and then as everything moves further south, it kind of dissipates as some of the ingredients in the atmosphere become less favorable. So that's why we want to prepare for the very real possibility for a few tornadoes and just have a plan in place in case those warnings get issued. Tracking it all out on radar, storms will be firing really after noon. So before noon in the morning, we'll have some showers starting to fill in, especially across Wisconsin, Michigan. The bulk of the storms will start firing off 3 to 4 o'clock. That's when near to just south of Chicago, we could get a few of these isolated supercells occurring. Initially, the biggest threat will be that very large hail and tornadoes, especially as some more discrete individual cells form. Any one of these cells here, some very big hail makers, again, up to baseball size, that could cause significant damage. So if possible, try to get cars parked under a roof. But also that isolated tornado threat, something we're tracking closely across this region. Eventually, these storms will congeal more into a line as they move south across mid-sections of Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio. So Chicago, you're going to be on the far northern fringes of the biggest threat. The biggest threat will actually be just south of the city. This is now into 7 o'clock. Some very rowdy storms across the regions. It could be moving through Pittsburgh around 8 and then progressing a little bit further to the south. Notice with time it congeals into more of that just widespread damaging wind event instead of those isolated hail and tornado risk, which is good news to lower that tornado risk, but we still want to stay weather aware for some of these stronger storms. Then everything moves south as we go into the evening and overnight hours past midnight, 2-3 a.m. Still some storms, some decent rainfall falling, and then everything really falls apart by the time we're waking up Friday morning. There's also a low-end flood threat with this, a 1 out of 4 excessive rainfall outlook by the Weather Prediction Center. Some training of storms, some heavy thunderstorms is possible for some brief ponding. Just remember, turn around, don't drown. No major flooding though is expected. Alright, the other story we're tracking is a big temperature drop with this from Friday into Saturday across much of the eastern US. Before this front, we're baking in the heat. We have 90s to triple digits widespread. Notice that front starting to intrude in the north as soon as midday Thursday when some of those storms are in progression, and then it really cuts in some 40s and 30s filtering behind with some much colder air. Waking up Friday morning, freezing across the north, still relatively mild across much of the south, but Friday, the front really really finishes its work everywhere east from the Rockies. 40s and 30s start spilling in. Saturday morning, waking up a lot chillier than we have been. Florida, you're really the only ones that's still in the 60s. Everyone else is much cooler. And then daytime highs on Saturday compared to the 70s, 80s, and 90s we've been having for honestly the past 2 weeks. These 40s, 50s, and 60s is going to feel a lot cooler. Honestly, a lot more pleasant in my opinion, but it'll catch a lot of us off guard. So just make sure you're prepared for some colder weather coming in. Sunday morning, it's going to be cold in the 30s before the heat starts rebuilding, and then we'll talk about that more in a minute. I did want to zoom into the Midwest because look at areas like Chicago. Look how drastic of a temperature drop we're tracking. This is kind of the peak heat ahead of the front. Notice all these 70s and 80s in portions of the Midwest from Missouri to Illinois. Chicago right here, we're around 77 degrees at 2. As the front and storms arrive, we drop 10 degrees, 63 degrees in just an hour by 3. Another hour later by 4, we're then in the 50s, and then after that we continue into the 50s and the 40s, and all these areas in the 80s, it's a very sharp temperature drop into the 40s and 30s. It's just going to be a very wild ride. The winds will pick up, the storms will come, and then it'll be much colder, and if you're preparing for those 80s, you're going to be caught well off guard. Alright, the last concern we're tracking with this cold front is it will pick up the fire weather threat and shift it a little bit further south. So in this kind of orangish color, that's where we have an elevated fire risk. The risk is highest though in this red color where critical fire conditions are possible. We have some gusty winds, some very hot temperatures ahead of the cold front. Even once the cold front passes though, we still got some drier air moving in, and with some of those gusty winds, that's really fanning the flames where if any fire were to start, it could spread very quickly. So just the biggest thing here is prevention. This doesn't mean that a fire will happen, but we want to stay extra vigilant, no burning outside, no doing anything that would accidentally cause any flames. Alright, so that's what we're tracking in the immediate future, that strong cold front, some storms, that fire weather risk. Taking a look a little bit longer term though, we do have some heat building back pretty quickly behind that front. So these below average temperatures, these blue values on Saturday, that's that colder air coming in that'll catch many of us by surprise. One day later though, on Sunday, the warmth quickly builds back. We're going from 80s on Thursday down to the 60s and 70s Friday and Saturday, and then back into the 80s on Sunday for parts of the Central Plains. So really a temperature roller coaster. Notice the core of the heat building in Sunday into Monday, so very well above average temperatures. Even some records are possible. Eventually we'll get a larger change middle of next week as we head into April. The colder air will return, eat away into some of this warmer air, and as it does so, we're getting into more of a pattern where a lot of moisture will be flowing in, and this leads the way for a lot of storm potential. Over the past few weeks, we've been largely dry and have really been talking about that record heat, that big ridge of high pressure. Well, that's quickly going to weaken, and in its place, we'll have some cooler air and some stormier conditions expected, which is definitely a change of pace as we get into the first few weeks of April. This will also bring a lot of severe weather concerns with it. Specifically, here's what I'm talking about. So we have this area of ridging. You can see this orange shade. That's the high pressure sinking air leading to all the warmth. Over the next few days, the ridge kind of lingers, even despite that cold front. That's why it's going to heat up so quickly behind the front. But we have a larger scale changing coming into the middle of next week. Instead of that orange color, the ridge kind of gets shunted off to the east over the Atlantic Ocean, and in this place we get this trough with all these green colors coming in. You can very clearly see this dip in the jet stream. When that happens, this is a classic pattern for spring storms and potential severe weather, especially now that we're getting deeper into the severe weather months. As we head into April, strong storms become more of a threat, so something we're tracking not only with that colder air but a much stormier pattern. Now obviously details are pretty low and uncertain, so we'll keep it vague for now. This is just more of a general warning that hey, as we're heading into April, the weather's going to become a lot more active, a lot more storms. You can see that potential first storm, and then just playing this forward into the first 2 weeks of April, see a lot more action than we've had the past few weeks. So this is welcome relief. We've been dealing with a lot of drought over much of the country, and we need a lot of this rain, but if it comes too much at once, some flooding is possible. And then we're also tracking that severe weather threat. Even some snow we can't rule out on the far northern sides. No big snowstorms look imminent, but even as we're heading into April, some spots we're still not done with snow fully just yet, so something to keep track of. But overall, the weather pattern just looks a lot more active. Just giving an early heads up, we'll have more videos in the future honing in on more specific details. Here's a Climate Prediction Center's week 2 outlook, and notice much of the country is green, above average precipitation. This is a big change from the past 2 weeks where we've been really dry, and again, many of this is welcome. We're just concerned with the severe weather threat attached to it. So a lot to track. The weather will definitely be picking up as we head into the new month. So that's all we're tracking in the world of weather. Make sure if you're in that severe weather risk, you're staying safe, having ways to get notified, and then prepare for some temperature roller coasters over the next few days. Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing if you want to stay on top of that weather pattern change that I was tracking about. Never miss an update into the weather. Hope you all have a great day, and I'll see you next time.